How can a fruit be so important that it means the difference between life and death? To find out, we head to the South Pacific in 1943, when World War II is going full bore, as the US and Japan battle for control. Hours before dawn, on August 2nd, a Japanese destroyer rams into an American PT boat and rips it in half.
These were small, they were about 78 feet long, they were wooden boats, they were fast, but they had very little armor on them.
2 crew members are killed. The survivors cling for life to the floating debris. Among them is their commander, a 22-year-old John Kennedy.
It was such a horrendous attack that all of the other boats that were with JFK, they didn't even check for survivors. They just took off.
All seems lost for Kennedy and his crew, but the young lieutenant remains calm and begins to put a daring rescue plan into motion.
Kennedy is the one who sort of takes a leadership role. He gets the men's attention, sort of puts a damper on the panic that ensues when the first damage occurs.
Kennedy leads his men in a 3-hour swim to the closest island, including a badly injured crewmate, who he tows by clenching the man's life jacket strap between his teeth.
Not only is he swimming in the choppy Pacific Ocean, dragging a guy with his teeth. I don't know if Michael Phelps could drag a guy with his teeth, but we're talking about some of the most dangerous shark-infested waters in the world.
Once on land, the crew is marooned.
They don't have water, they don't have food, and there was really no hope of rescue. So what Kennedy would do, night after night, is he would swim out in the middle of the night in shark-infested waters, out into the shipping channel, in hopes that he could see an Allied boat and flag it down with a flashlight. Now, of course, there are also Japanese boats going out there. That took guts.
Kennedy swims out every night for 4 nights with no sign of rescue, until he finally encounters some local islanders. And that's where the coconut comes in.
Kennedy takes a coconut and he carves a message in this coconut. He says, 11 alive, native knows position and reef. And then he signs his name, Kennedy.
Kennedy gives the coconut to the islanders and instructs them to take it to the PT base on an island 38 miles away. Their rescue comes 2 days later. He's awarded the Navy and Marine Corps Medal, and the PT-109 story becomes a powerful weapon in his political arsenal.
It catapulted him into the eyes of the American people and really helped out with his campaign. To the Senate and eventually the White House.
Why don't you tell us about that coconut on your deck? Well, our PT boat was sunk by a Japanese destroyer, and we found a native and gave him a coconut and wrote a message on it, and I kept it as a memento.
When John F. Kennedy ran for president, the PT-109 incident defined in the public mind who Kennedy was. It created an aura about him that this was a man that we could trust with our country.
The 1960 election is one of the closest elections in American history. Truly, anything could have changed that election. And if it wasn't for the PT-109 incident, I don't think JFK wins that race. I think it's President Nixon in 1960. And if you can imagine how different history would be, Vietnam, the Bay of Pigs, Cuba.
In many ways, if not for a coconut, there may not have been Camelot.
I understand some of you kids had a lecture from Mr. McGee. I guess if you have, well, maybe all the classes are getting on Camelot. Did he talk about King Arthur and Camelot? Did he do that? Yeah, we'll tie that into the Kennedy administration later. That gives you a little idea. They don't give credit to the other guy, do they, that swam out with them? Sometimes it's a little frustrating when not everybody gets the credit they deserve, but that was fairly accurate, not bad for a history short. Okay, we will move on then and continue this profile. After Kennedy's military career, it was time for an entrance into politics. But it wasn't necessarily JFK's doing. Actually, the fate of his older brother Joe Jr. set the stage for JFK's political career. And I think I told you this once before, really Joseph Kennedy Jr. was kind of the apple of his father's eye, and Joseph Kennedy Sr. had visions of his oldest son, Joseph Kennedy Jr., becoming President of the United States. So after the war, John Kennedy entered politics as he believed it was his responsibility to fill the political shoes of his older brother. So that's really why he got into politics. I'm not sure he was obviously too interested in that at the time. But since his father pushed hard for his older brother to be maybe even President of the United States, John Kennedy believed he had a responsibility to fill those political shoes of his older brother. This is what he later said publicly about his entrance into politics. And you can just listen, you don't have to write it down. He said, "It was like being drafted. My father wanted his eldest son in politics. Wanted isn't the right word. He demanded it. You know my father." So most historians will tell you that John Kennedy's entrance into politics was not self-driven, it was father-driven. Well, he entered politics, and in 1946, he was elected to the House of Representatives, representing the state of Massachusetts. So in 1946, he was elected to the House of Representatives, representing Massachusetts. And during the time he spent as a member of the House, he met a pretty young lady by the name of Jacqueline Bouvier at a dinner party in Washington, D.C. So during the time that John Kennedy was serving in the House of Representatives, he met a pretty young lady by the name of Jacqueline Bouvier, who we've talked about before, and he met her at a dinner party in Washington, D.C. Now, she was better known as Jackie to her family and friends, and she was the daughter of a very wealthy Wall Street broker by the name of John V. Bouvier III. So Jackie, as she was better known to her family and friends, was the daughter of a wealthy Wall Street broker by the name of John V. Bouvier III. Well, what do most people do after they serve time in the House? They decide they're going to set their sights higher and they're going to run for the Senate. And in 1952, he decided to run for the United States Senate. You know who he defeated in November of 1952 to become Senator of Massachusetts? A familiar name possibly if you're gaining this information. He defeated Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. in 1952 to become Senator of Massachusetts. Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. was the Republican candidate for Senator of Massachusetts. Anybody remember where that name came back into being? Because Kennedy's going to defeat him twice. He defeats him as a Senate. What else did he defeat him? What? What? Yeah, he ran for the vice presidency with Richard Nixon in 1960. So Kennedy actually defeated, technically, Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. twice. The first time to become Senator of Massachusetts, and the second time during the presidential and vice presidential election of 1960. Well, in 1953, as we mentioned, John and Jackie were married, and his political career really began to blossom. She was certainly an asset to his political career. And they actually had 4 children. How many are you more familiar with? Anybody? Anybody know how many children that publicly it looked like they had? 2. Okay. Their first daughter was stillborn in August of 1956. Their first daughter was stillborn in August of 1956. Pay a little bit of attention to these next few dates. On November 27th of 1957, Caroline Kennedy was born. November 27th, 1957, Caroline Kennedy was born, a daughter. On November 25th of 1960, November 25th, of 1960, John F. Kennedy Jr. was born. What's the significance of those two dates, maybe? They're really close, and they're also really close to what? The day the president was assassinated, on November 25th. Actually, they celebrated John Kennedy Jr.'s birthday the day his father was buried. And then Caroline's birthday was 2 days later. And finally, Patrick Kennedy was born on August 7th, 1963, and died 2 days later on August 9th. He was born very premature and could not survive. So the Kennedys had 4 children, only 2 survived. Stillborn daughter in August of 1956. Caroline Kennedy was born on November 27, 1957. John Jr. on November 25, 1960. And young Patrick was born on August 7, 1963, but died 2 days later on August 9th. Well, back to Kennedy's career. His senatorial career was going wonderfully until 1954, and it came to an abrupt halt in that year when he began experiencing severe back pain. Okay? So his Senate career, political career was going great guns, but all of a sudden it came to an abrupt halt in 1954 when he began experiencing severe back pain. And he had back surgery, which at the time was a difficult thing. It took him almost 2 years to recover, 1955 and 1956. It took him almost 2 years to recover from his back surgery. And to bide his time, what did he do? Anybody know what he did? He wrote one book, which was entitled Profiles in Courage. As we talked about, it was about 8 courageous Americans during the course of history. We also told you that the book took off and eventually won the Pulitzer Prize as the year's best journalistic paper in 1957. And we also told you because of his successes, Kennedy was mentioned very seriously for the vice presidency to run with Adlai Stevenson in 1956, but he lost. Why? His dad actually campaigned member against him because he knew that Stevenson was going to lose. So again, Kennedy writes the book Profiles in Courage. It takes off, it wins the Pulitzer Prize. In 1957 as the year's best journalistic paper. It blossoms his career even more, and he was seriously mentioned for the vice presidency in 1956 but lost to Estes Kefauver. Now take out your handout I gave you on pages 11, 12, and 13, if you would, please. 11, 12, and 13 on If Kennedy Lived. 11, 12, and 13. This is kind of an interesting story here concerning his back surgery. Okay? So everybody get on page 11 on that thing. And we'll read this and hopefully you can understand the importance of this article. It says, but it was in 1954 that he faced the gravest threat to his future, political or otherwise. His doctors told him bluntly that without a spinal fusion operation, it was likely that he'd be unable to walk in a year or two. But because of the susceptibility to infection, the operation could very well prove fatal. Don't do it, his father advised. Look at Roosevelt, won 4 terms from a wheelchair. But Jack was adamant, I'd rather die than live that way, he'd said. And from a bluntly political view, it was hard to imagine how a prospective president whose root message was youth, energy, vigor, and future could succeed campaigning from a wheelchair or on crutches. So on October 21st, he underwent a 3-hour operation during which the surgical team embedded metal screws into his spine. As feared, he developed infections. Once again, he was given the last rites of the church. It took 9 months of further surgery and recovery before he was able to return to the Senate. In the 9 years since, with the help of a compliant series of doctors and a determination to dissemble, he had been able to hide the truth of his ill health from the press and the public. His campaign team denied he had classic Addison's disease, when he tapped the services of Dr. Max Jacobson, widely known as Dr. Feelgood, for the amphetamines he supplied, the doctor was kept off his list of appointments. "I don't care if it's horse piss," he said to Brother Bob, who expressed concern about the medication. "It works." And now, thanks to the insistence of Admiral George Berkeley, the White House physician, a regimen of exercise and relaxation had provided a decent measure of relief, although he spent literally every day in considerable pain. But what if that 1954 operation hadn't worked? Suppose he hadn't survived or had been forced into retirement. It wasn't just his career that would have ended. Yes, his father would have looked to Bobby or Teddy to step in, but that would have been an impossibility. In the fall of 1954, Bobby would have been 28 years old and thus constitutionally ineligible for a Senate seat. Teddy would have been 22, not even old enough for a seat in the House. And without a brother in the White House to smooth the way to political success, as he later did for Teddy in 1962, neither Bobby's thin accomplishments nor his abrasive personality would have been enough, even with Dad's money. The operation had been a coin flip. Had it landed the other way, there would not only have been no President Kennedy, there would have been no Kennedy dynasty at all. And he would have not found himself in October of 1960 in a fight for the White House he was by no means certain to win. Isn't it funny how little things in history might make a difference? This was a very dangerous surgery at the time. Could have killed him. Could have killed him easily. But he survived it. And by surviving it, we have history as we do today. The thing to remember about this is President Kennedy, prior to the presidency, but during the time he was President of the United States, he was in pain virtually every single day. Horrible pain. Wore a back brace, all kinds of different things. So kind of keep that in mind. Okay, we will move on to our final thing of the day. An assassination attempt failed. Did you know that there was an assassination attempt on President Kennedy prior to the one that was successful? A lot of people do not. An assassination attempt failed. On Sunday morning, December 11th, 1960, President-elect Kennedy was at the family's oceanfront Palm Beach home in Florida. On Sunday morning, December 11th, 1960, President-elect Kennedy was at the family's oceanfront Palm Beach home in Florida. He was basically there working on his tan and working on his inaugural address that he would be giving in January of '61. Well, the morning of December 11th, which was a Sunday, Kennedy was getting ready to attend Mass at a local Catholic church in Palm Beach. So, Kennedy headed to the front door of the home, where the Secret Service are waiting for him to drive the short distance to the church, because he's under Secret Service protection because he's the president-elect, okay? Parked down the street from the Kennedy home was a 1950 Buick. And inside, sitting behind the wheel of that car, was Richard Pavlik. So again, parked down the street from the Kennedy home in Palm Beach, was a 1950 Buick with a man by the name of Richard Pavlik sitting behind the wheel. Pavlik was a 73-year-old retired postal worker who was holding a switch that was wired to 7 sticks of dynamite. Okay? Pavlik was a 73-year-old retired postal worker who was holding in his hand a switch wired to 7 sticks of dynamite. Now, unbeknownst to Kennedy or the Secret Service, Pavlik had been stalking Kennedy across the country, driven by a hatred of the Catholic Church and a conviction that Joseph Kennedy Sr. had stolen the presidency for his son. So Richard Pavlik actually had been stalking Kennedy across the country. And he was driven by a hatred of not only the Catholic Church, but also he was convinced that Joseph Kennedy Sr. had basically stolen the presidency from Richard Nixon for his son. What do you think he was going to do? He was going to drive down that roadway and he was going to ram that Buick into the back of Kennedy's automobile when he got in there, push that button and detonate those 7 sticks of dynamite. That was his plan. That's what he was going to do. The Secret Service were totally indifferent to his presence. Pavlik had a clear, unimpeded path to Kennedy's car. And just before Pavlik made the decision to rush that car down the road and ram it into the back of the Kennedy automobile and push the switch, Jackie Kennedy comes out of the door of the home to the automobile with her 3-year-old daughter Caroline to see her husband off, to say goodbye to him. So just as Kennedy was about to leave, Jacqueline came to the door of the automobile with 3-year-old Caroline to see her husband off. Turns out that Pavlik was very willing to kill himself and John F. Kennedy, but he was not willing to add Mrs. Kennedy and the 3-year-old daughter to the mix. And so he simply waited for another opportunity, did not do it. Well, somehow word got out about his plan and Pavlik was arrested 4 days later. So the opportunity did not occur as Pavlik was arrested 4 days later when word was discovered about his plan for the president-elect. Now, according to the Secret Service, after Pavlik was arrested, they stated that he had enough dynamite